to another seminar of the Computational Humanities Research Group at King's College London. And today, I'm very happy to introduce Caitlin Wilson, who's a PhD candidate in Digital Humanities at King's College London, holding a UKRI scholarship from the London Arts and Humanities Partnership. She's working on a collaborative doctoral award with the National Archives, working with a fine case law service to develop a semantic search function which will aim to reduce barriers to access by bridging the gap between legal and everyday English. She holds an undergraduate degree in linguistics from the University of Edinburgh and an MC in digital scholarship from the University of Oxford. And she's also trained as digital archivist at the UK Parliamentary Archives. And today she's going to talk about keywords, the concepts using user-centered semantic search for digital legal collections.
Perfect. Thank you, Barbara. Yes, so thank you very much for coming to my seminar today as part of the Computational Humanities Research Group seminar series. Today's talk is kind of a work in progress of my PhD research so far, and also an opportunity for me to demo my most recent prototype semantic search engine. So the way today will work is I'll first give you a background on my research, focusing on sort of the whys, why we thought this research was necessary, and then the how we're trying to provide a solution to the issue of the language gap within the justice sector. So I thought I would start by getting an idea of who is in the audience, just to help me with my my talk today. So if you scan the QR code, if you're online, feel free to put in the chat if you can't see or can't access anything. And hopefully this should start loading. Yes, a few people here. So what do we have? Mostly digital humanists, some people who know NLP, linguistics. Okay, that's really good to know. So I'll try and keep the linguistics theory to a minimum and stick more to the digital humanities. And I will talk a little bit about my code, but it should be quite accessible. But if you don't follow along at any moment, please feel free. The Mentimeter will stay up and we'll flick through it, but it'll be an opportunity for me at the end to collect some feedback. So I would be very thankful for that at the end, but there'll also be time for questions at the end. So jumping right in, a bit of history and a bit of context on my research. So as Barbara mentioned, I'm doing a collaborative PhD with the National Archives, specifically with their Find Case Law team. So Find Case Law is a service and a website hosted by the National Archives that provides free access to court judgments from England and Wales. I don't think there are any legal people in the audience, but if you did know, it used to be Bailey who hosted all of this content, and then in like 2020, 2021, the MOJ moved that contract over to the National Archives. So they're still working on a back catalogue. At the moment, the catalogue is about 75,000 documents strong, dating back to 2001 and being continuously updated every day. You're welcome to go and have a look at the National Archives website. It's all free and publicly available. And the idea behind the website is to provide an alternative to those paywalled services like Westlaw, LexisNexis, VLex that are aimed at law firms, barristers, solicitors and judges for them to do their research. So this is aimed at more of the general public to be able to access information about court judgments. At the moment, you'll see that the website is in beta. It's been in beta for a while now, since 2022, and that's because the team at Find Case Law are continuously running improvements on how to present their research. So this homepage has changed many times in the year and a half that I've started working with them. They have lots of great user researchers who are trying to figure out what's the best way to share that information, and also through my research, we're trying to understand how best to make the search function as accessible as possible. So as it stands, Find Case Law uses a standard keyword search with BM25 relevance ranking. Essentially what that means is that any words that you type in the search bar, the system finds exact matches of those terms within its collection of documents, and then the ranking system essentially works by finding the documents with the most amount of matches in it, and that's how they get pushed to the front. This is good. It's standard function for a lot of collections because it's the most easy to run. But one of the main issues with this is that it presupposes that the audience would know the contents of the judgments before even searching them. And this is something that we find that is a particular issue with a collection like Find Case Law that is quite jargon heavy, has its own specific type of language, which is legal language. So that's sort of where I come in, and I am trying to research different ways to improve this search function for a different audience. Speaking of audience, so as I mentioned, National Archives are really interested in user research, and they do a lot of work trying to understand who their user base is. And this is some really interesting research and graphics that came out of some colleagues of mine at the National Archives that they call the legal inclusion scale. So they tried to map the type of user personas that would typically use a service like Find Case Law, or also legislation.gov, which is kind of the second branch of government that the National Archives host documents for. So we have an array of users going from your average Joe off the street who is just looking for legal advice all the way up to a legal professional like a barrister and solicitor. And we've kind of ranked those in terms of confidence with using a system like Find Case Law. Now, you might think that who I'm aiming at, based on everything I've said so far, is this person here, the kind of lost looking for advice right at the end of on the left of the graphic. But this is what we would call an anti-persona. So something that I'm constantly having to hammer home, and that I will mention quite a few times during this talk, is that Find Case Law and my research isn't about giving legal advice or interpretation of the law. It's about offering a solution for searching and navigating a case law collection. So someone looking for advice, they could use Find Case Law to kind of gather documents, but they shouldn't be coming to us or my project to get an interpretation or any advice. We would direct those towards legal professionals. I don't have a background in the law. I can't be asked to give any sort of legal advice, and that goes the same for all of the people on the team at Find Case Law. So who I'm really interested in is that sort of third person that I would call the non-legal professional. So that would be someone who has a little bit of an idea of how to maybe read through a court judgment, maybe has come across information about a court judgment through the news, or has themselves started a court proceeding, and is just trying to gather up information for their own case, whether that be their own research, just informing themselves about their rights, or if they are, like I said, taking a case to court and trying to know what kind of way judges would tend to rule based on previous research. And so with that in mind, that's kind of the character that I have in the back of my mind when I am trying to develop this prototype. Is not someone who needs like instant advice, because they would be more going to a charity, but someone trying to build up a collection of case law themselves. So before I go into the, that's the wrong slide. Before I go into the questions about why we're doing this, let me turn to you and ask you what you think the biggest barriers to accessing case law might be. Any advice on here would be helpful. Just give me an idea. I'm just checking, Barbara, this is still showing up on the Teams call. Knowledge. So yes, people not knowing what they're looking for, jargon, specific legal terms. So yeah, all stuff I've mentioned already. There are lots of different reasons that we might think that legal advice might be difficult to access online. And through my research and research that has already been done, we've kind of found two key issues. So the first is access to justice in general. So we found since 2013, roughly, that the demand in people representing themselves at court has risen significantly. As a little bit of background, this is all due to LASPO 2012, which is the Legal Aid, Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act, which was a government act that removed legal aid for most private family law matters. And this meant that there was a huge surge in litigants in person, specifically in family court hearings. Some data from the Law Society found that roughly 36% of from the MOJ, sorry, that 36% of family court hearings currently have one or more people representing themselves. So that means that they don't have access to legal advice or any sort of representation, formal representation like a barrister. So they would have to be presenting, finding their own evidence themselves and presenting that to the judge directly. So this is a very clear policy piece of evidence to show that access to justice is more and more necessary today. There's some very interesting research from the Law Society, this graphic on the right-hand side of the screen. I really recommend looking at that. They've done a lot of research into how LASPO 2012 has affected just your average person trying to represent themselves in court or get legal support. The second issue that I kind of focused my research around with regards to access to justice is this so-called language gap. So by that I mean that there is a difference in language used by you or I right now versus the language that we found in fine case law and lots of other legal documents. So this was sort of the focus of the first year of my PhD and the first prototype that I released with the National Archives. And this was looking at how we could sort of empirically prove that there is a difference in language. So to cut a very long story short, I worked with static word embeddings trained on the fine case law corpus and compared those to static embeddings trained on the British National Corpus, which is a really good snapshot of spoken and written English in the UK today. And I found that there is very clear evidence that the same words in the fine case law collection and the British National Corpus have very different meanings. So this is kind of evidence that there is a gap in the language, and therefore we can expect that your average person, like the users that I mentioned a few slides ago, might have issues when they are using a keyword-based search system because they just don't understand or have that pre-existing knowledge of the type of language within the collection. Just anecdotally, there's other issues with regards to the language gap. Terminology drift is a big issue. Legal English isn't constant, isn't static, it's constantly changing. As an example, in the Children and Families Act 2014, they've renamed contact orders to child arrangement orders. So it's little things like that policy is constantly changing the way in which legal English is being used. And if you're using a keyword-based search system, if you search contact orders, you would only be getting documents pre-2014, which might not be relevant to your case anymore. And then, conceptual ranking, like I mentioned before, the fine case law as it stands is just using a BM25 system, which is more about number of keywords rather than thinking about the concepts of the entire document as a whole. So hopefully I presented what the problems are, and there are many more problems facing the access to justice issue, but the one that we are focusing on is just this first port of call of searching a collection. Now, there are many solutions to this problem, but one of them, and the one that I'm proposing, is semantic search, and this is where the prototype that I'll be presenting today comes into play. I'm going to quickly give you a bit of background on sort of the methods behind how the prototype works and what sort of tools I've been using to build it, and then hopefully we'll go straight into a demo to see how it works in practice. So, semantic search Semantic search is many different things, but essentially, compared to keyword search, it looks at concepts rather than specific words. So instead of asking, does a document within this collection contain these exact words from my search query, semantic search asks, does the document contain this concept, or does it discuss this concept? So keyword search, as I mentioned, can be good for a lot of things when you know the exact terms you're looking for, but what it does do is it's quite restricted and limited. So it will miss a lot of synonyms and related concepts, which with legal jargon is quite an issue because there's lots of terms that can be used for slightly varying legal types of terminology. And then, yes, it requires that precise legal terminology to find the exact matches. Whereas semantic search, it can sort of expand on the search query by matching synonyms and related ideas, and it therefore allows for users to search in plain English as opposed to that legal jargon. Semantic search works in a lot of different ways. It's not a new concept, but one of the foundational ways in which semantic search works is through vector embeddings, and that is what I have been using and experimenting with on this prototype. I'll try and keep this quite top level, but essentially vector embeddings are a way in which to represent meaning of words in multidimensional vector space. So using a model, in this case I've been using a transformer model, you could input a large amount of text and it would turn every word or every paragraph or every document, depending on what level we're working at, into a point in mathematical space. And that point would be defined by all the surrounding terms in it, and that gives us an idea of a concept rather than a static definition. So the way semantic search works is on the first hand, we have our collection of documents, and those have all been turned into embeddings through a transformer model. So I've been using the all mini LM. I'll come back to that later. So they're all embedded into embeddings, and then the search query, every time a user types in a new search query, that query itself gets turned into an embedding, and then using cosine similarity, which is a mathematical function, it maps which terms from the user query are the closest to different documents in our collection. So for this prototype, I've been working with paragraph level embedding. I mentioned a little bit earlier some of the work I did in the first year of my PhD, which was looking a lot more at word level meaning. And when I was doing that, I was working with static embeddings at the word level. I've now moved up to paragraph level embeddings because word level, while it is useful to prove that there's a difference in kind of meaning between different terms, it's still very granular, and when we're searching, we're more searching for the entire document, entire concept. So moved up to paragraph level embeddings. So every paragraph in every case was turned into a vector embedding. And I also did a bit of metadata context prefixing. That was just to help with refined searching. So if someone wanted to search for specific dates or specific judges or courts, that would all be prepended to each paragraph to help give a bit of context so that the embeddings are just kind of lost in vector space. And then search is done on the paragraph level, but we don't want to just return individual paragraphs to the user. We want to return overall cases so that they could read through them. So I used an average scoring ranking to aggregate the scores from each paragraph and then find those with the closest matches overall to the search query. I hope that made sense. We can come back to questions later. But yeah, very high level overview of how the prototype actually works. I then wanted to add another layer of explainability to my prototype. So as I mentioned, I had a prototype that I was working on last year, and around this time last year, I conducted some user research to see how people would understand the tool. And while the tool kind of worked on a quite conceptual level in that a search query would return relevant cases, something that I found again and again is that people had a very difficult time in grasping what each case was actually about. And that's completely understandable. These are very long, detailed documents written really by judges for other judges and barristers and solicitors. So understanding what exactly is in that case made for the search journey to be quite long and complex. So something I was inspired by is headnotes. So headnotes are something that a lot of proprietary search systems like Westlaw, LexisNexis that I mentioned earlier, that they use to help their customers with their searching. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see an example of a headnote taken from the Incorporated Law Reports. So this would be a very high-level overview of what's actually happening in the case. So you can see some of it is just individual terms and then sentences, and this helps give an idea of what's actually happening in the case, what way it was ruled and what it's actually about, without having to read through the entire court judgment. These are amazing. They're very, very helpful, but these are written by in-house lawyers for each of these companies, something that I or the National Archives don't have access to. So I was trying to think of ways in which I could sort of recreate that on a smaller, more achievable level. And I came to the idea of topic tagging each case. So that would be giving a kind of label, high-level overview of what each case is about, just in a couple of terms each. And I decided that the way to do this would be to sort of build our own legal ontology through plain English definitions of legal terms. And to do that, I turned to the Citizens Advice website, which is an amazing resource for plain English descriptions of the court system, how specific judges might rule against things, and then just definitions of what things actually mean and what people's rights actually are. So this is what I've come up with so far. The prototype is still very much a work in progress. So when we get to the demo, you'll see that I'm still struggling with matching every case to a topic, but that's something that I'm working on. And yeah, here's just a little example of what my prototype looked like at the beginning. I kind of just get a top result here that would give the title of the case, which is very opaque, doesn't really mean anything much to anyone. And so trying to just add a little bit more information by tagging it with things like parental responsibility, child arrangement, contact order, just to give the user a little bit of a heads up of what's actually inside this case and hopefully help speed up the process when it comes to finding the correct search result. So why use Citizens Advice? It's a great resource. They have a public interest mission, so it's all aimed at people and written by people without legal training, without formal legal training. That means so people who've worked in the advice sector, but not so much barristers and solicitors. Importantly, it's free, but also a very trusted resource, which is great for us. And then, as I mentioned, it's all written in plain English. So as Citizens Advice is one of these government-funded bodies, everything has to be written at the national reading age, which I think, as it stands, is a reading age of 12. So everything should be very accessible to the average user. And yeah, they cover a really broad coverage of cases. I'll get back to that later. There's still some things I'm working on, but this is basically how it works. I've built up the beginnings of an ontology, of a definition list, I suppose, that's been scraped from the Citizens Advice website, then gone through and manually checked everything to make sure that the definitions actually match what's on the website, and added links for all of those. All of those definitions have been turned into embeddings using that same transformer model that I was using for the search queries and for the documents themselves. And then those, again, using cosine similarity, are matched to the paragraph, to the first, I can't remember now, the first 6 or 7 paragraphs in each document to give a high-level overview of what each case is about. Yeah, using, again, a cosine similarity threshold of 0.4, something that I'm still working on, trying to find the exact balance of what is right. But I found that 0.4 gives between 1 and 4 tags, which seems like a viable option and just the right amount of information to help the user. But we'll find out whether or not that's actually helpful when we start user testing for this prototype. Cool, so I'm almost ready to start the demo, but I quickly wanted to be a bit more upfront about some limitations and some blockers that I'm still facing with regards to this prototype. So the main one is that there's no formal validation that's been done yet. So that's something I'm working on. In the next few months, I will hopefully be able to get some law students to validate the topic tags that have been created and see whether or not they actually match up to the cases. And that should give me a really good gold standard that I can then continue training my data on and make my tags more accurate as I go on. As talking about the topic tags, at the moment, that collection that I was talking about of terms and definitions from Citizens Advice is only 109 terms. That's partly for two reasons. So first of all, Citizens Advice website is finite. They only talk about so many things. There's quite a broad coverage, but still a lot that could be talked about. And then, as I said, I've been going through and manually checking all of the terms themselves. So there's definitely a time constraint there. So I'm looking to expand out into different collections to see if I can build on the topic tags. So the Law Commission is one that I'm looking at the moment because they also have really good plain English definitions. And hopefully this will be a great resource to share with other academics if we can build this plain English ontology of legal definitions. Two more things to mention. So the demo, as I'm going to show it today, is running on an all general purpose transformer model, which is the All-Mini LM. That's because it is free, low kind of cost with terms to GPU. So it's something I could run on my own machine and easy to use. So it's just been general purpose. Ideally, I will be moving over to something like LegalBERT, which has been trained on vast amounts of legal data. I've started doing a bit of experiments, and unsurprisingly, I found that the LegalBERT based model is already performing a lot better than the All-Mini, but it's still providing decent results as it stands. But that's something to think about when I move over to the live version. And then lastly, as I mentioned, this is still very much a work in prototype. So as it stands, I've only embedded documents from the family courts. That was mostly just to reduce my scope and make things easier as I was kind of experimenting and ideating. But as I mentioned, all the way at the beginning, most litigants in person are taking themselves to family court, not criminal court or administrative court. So it also just makes sense to have that as the focus. But moving forward, when the version goes live, hopefully we'll be working on live embeddings and continual refreshing so that the system can work on the entire fine case law collection and not just this quite limited version. So yeah, just a few notes before we go in to the demo. So I do have a Google Colab available, but I think for now, what would be more helpful is if I just show you as is. And that is going to require this. So while I'm switching over to the prototype, please go back onto the Mentimeter and try and just think of a few search queries that we could try. As I've mentioned, they might not work, but that's still helpful for me to know what does work, what doesn't work, what the edge cases are. And we can give it a go. So this is what the prototype looks like at the moment. It's just running locally on my own servers, not live yet. So we can try a couple of different cases. So one that I had, I think I've got it pulled up already on the Fine Case Law website, yes. I tried just unmarried father wants to see his children. Again, I'm trying to focus on the family courts here and trying to think of possible cases that people might be coming up with. So we've got issues here of no marriage between the parents, which makes it a bit more complicated with regards to custody agreements. So we could see that this might be something that people would search for. So we can see here with the current Fine Case Law website, it's pulling out the terms child and father, which, yes, two main terms in this case, but there's a lot more to the case. For example, here we're talking about abduction, might not necessarily be what we're looking for when it comes to here. But if we try this on the prototype, unmarried father wants to see Oh, unarmed. Yes. I hope it's unarmed. Brilliant. So this is what the prototype looks like at the moment. I'm just going to focus right now on what's showing and what's working and what isn't working. So as we can see, I'm still just listing things in case-by-case basis. So as with the National Archives Fan Case Law Service, the title is just the title of the court case itself, which from user research I know is very opaque and doesn't really mean much to anybody. But a bit of a tricky one to try and come up with alternatives with, as these are legal documents. Their titles are, kind of intended as they are. We can already see that 7 out of the 10 cases found, it's just been set to 10 right here, have been tagged with legal concepts. So decent coverage, but not 100%, which is what I'm aiming for. So if we look down at these two, we can see that some of the tags are parental responsibility, local council care, responsibility for children, seeing adoption. So already some, hopefully a little bit of insight into what the case is actually about. And here, the excerpt that it's showing is the paragraph that is the most similar to that search query. So remember what I was talking about earlier with those embeddings being matched to paragraphs rather than the entire document. I've added the similarity scores here just as a bit of transparency of how things are calculated. From my user research, people neither care nor want to see this, so I can always get rid of that. But I thought that as it stands, just to demonstrate the capabilities, useful to see what's actually coming up. We can see that similarity isn't very high, so similarity is scored from 0 to 1, so 0.595 is not massive. So either that could indicate a couple of things. Either there just aren't a lot of cases about this, which if we look back to find case law, only 111 documents found. That's not an awful lot for a collection of 75,000. So that might be it. Other reasons might be that my embeddings aren't working as well as they should be. So that's where future work on training embeddings with the legal BERT, for example, might show higher similarity scores. Or it could be something else that I've not quite discovered yet. Still experimenting all the time. Right, did anyone want to try a search query? Let me see if I can go back to the Mentimeter. Seeking inheritance after marriage, that's a good guess. So again, I found 10 cases. We could see if I go up to 50. Yeah, 50 cases found at the very least. So I'm already noticing as I'm doing this in front of you that I've set my limit to 50 cases. So not really a lot. So that's something that I can already start working on. And here with 50 cases, we're already seeing that the concepts tags have been matched to 27 out of the 50. So already lowering much closer to 50% coverage, which is far from what we're looking for. So still a lot of work to be done there. Again, the titles really aren't helpful. These are particularly unhelpful in the family courts because a lot of the time we're dealing with children and vulnerable people. So a lot of all names pretty much are pseudonymized or completely anonymized, which is why we're working with things like X versus C. Doesn't really mean anything to us. So something that I'm still trying to work out what's the best way to share that information. But again, as I said, the title of the court document is, it's a legal document. We can't really go around changing those titles. So something that I'd be interested to hear advice on. And again, here slightly higher similarity scores, so closer to what we're looking for. Ideally, we'd be looking for like that 0.6 to 0.7 similarity score would be sort of the ideal threshold in a semantic search function. Does anyone have any questions about the prototype itself? Anything unsure about? I can carry on with my talk and we can move to questions at the very end if you'd rather. Yeah. So let me switch back to.
Stop the recording, we've got questions.
Yeah, perfect. Brilliant. Okay, so I'll quickly end with kind of my next steps and plan going forward. So as I mentioned, the prototype as it stands is just available like locally hosted. The code is available on GitHub. I'll share the link at the end of the meeting, so you're welcome to have a look at it as you go, and you would be able to try it out for yourself. As I said, it's all based on local XML files. So those local embeddings, just at the moment, they're just locally saved on my computer. So the Python pipeline on GitHub gives all the information for that, and you'd be able to just scrape it directly from the Fine Case Law website. But it would mean having that storage for the XML files themselves. So a limitation there. And then something that I've not mentioned at all yet is Pinecone here. So I've been using Pinecone for vector storage. It's a great service, completely free, and something that I need to look at with the live system, because it being a free service, you are only limited to a certain amount of storage. So at the moment, I'm very far away from reaching my quota, but something to think about. But yeah, just thought I would give a little overview of what the live system will hopefully look like. Not an awful lot of difference between the actual code, and I've been trying it already, and it seems to be working well. So instead of working with locally downloaded XML files that have been turned into embeddings that are then again locally saved, we'd be working with the Fine Case Law API, so their Atom feed, directly pulling from the feed, and then automatically ingesting and creating embeddings for each document, and then carries on the same way with the embedding and tagging on ingest, upserting to Pinecone, and then results showed through just the Streamlit UI as it is. Okay, I have 2 slides left, and then we can move to the questions and answers. I thought I would kind of hedge my bets before we move on to the Q&A and kind of answer some questions that I get an awful lot of when I'm talking about my research to people, and that is surrounding artificial intelligence and LLMs. The main questions being, are you using it yet? And if so, why or why not? So as it stands, the prototype does not use any real form of LLMs. We're using transformer models to directly create our embeddings based on our own collection, so there's complete oversight over each step of the process. And that is my primary reason for not using LLMs, is that I want to maintain interpretability and reproducibility as much as possible. Also, working with a legal collection, interpretation and meaning is quite sensitive, so I want to avoid any type of bias or hallucination that might be incurred by using an LLM. But that's not to say that I'm completely opposed to it. I did mention earlier that I'm working to have human validation of my topic tagging. Now this is time and money costly, so I'm limited to how much I will be able to do, as a lot of academic projects or cultural heritage sites who would hopefully be using similar tools might be. So something that I will be experimenting with is building a gold standard a list of annotations made by humans, and then hopefully training LLMs on said annotations to be able to produce verifiable tags and kind of expand out, because my taggers will only, my validators will only be able to look at a certain number of cases. And so I'd want to expand out as much as possible. And that should hopefully be a really interesting piece of research, just looking at which models work best, which ones have the highest level of trust as compared to my kind of human-made annotation. And then something that might be worth looking at as well is kind of summary generation. Again, something that I'm unsure about, and it's a tricky line to toe, because as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is a search and retrieval project. It's not an interpretation or an advice project. So when it comes to providing a summary, we start towing that line between interpreting what's inside the case as opposed to just providing the case as it is. So something I'm still looking at, and something I will definitely be discussing in my next round of user research. Speaking of user research, this is something that I've been discussing with my participants during the first round, is kind of how people feel about using AI or LLMs in this type of research and kind of tool. And as expected, results are very mixed and very varied. People have either complete or absolutely no understanding of what an LLM or what AI even is, what it could do. And then when people do have a bit more of an understanding, there's very mixed emotions on how they would feel about this. Again, working within a legal collection, we have that little bit extra of danger of interpretation and wanting to provide information as accurately as possible, which people might worry a bit more about when it comes to something being AI generated. But people are time poor and don't want to read long court judgments. And so if you're trying to provide information to people, sometimes providing shortcuts might be the best solution. And that brings me on to the last question that I get all the time is why not just build a chatbot? Not the scope of the project. We're trying to find a way to explore inclusive retrieval tools rather than interpretation or advice tools. I know it's what a lot of people probably would want, is just to type in a simple question, get back a simple answer. But again, things get very complicated when you're providing legal information and advice. Not something that I would feel comfortable doing. And also we want to try and empower people to actually do their research themselves rather than just giving them out of the box answers. And this brings me on to my last slide, my next steps with regards to my research. So as I mentioned, the formal evaluation will be coming up soon, which is very exciting, as well as some threshold validation. I mentioned very briefly that at the moment, the topic tagging I'm using a 0.4 cosine similarity threshold. Might mean nothing to you, but we'll just be doing a bit of sampling there and see whether or not that works. The domain model comparison, I'm already actively doing that and looking at which models might be the best. At the moment, again, I've experimented with just the base legal BERT model, and it's performing very well, which is good news. And then, yeah, vocabulary expansion, which I also mentioned, to hopefully up that coverage of topic tags, as we saw with that that last search query. I was around 50%, so hopefully upgrading to closer to 100% of cases being tagged by topics. And then user research and the pipeline going live. I'm aiming for that to be happening in June, so watch this space, and hopefully I will have a fully functioning prototype live with help from the Fine Case Law team, who've always been very helpful, and then I'll be able to do proper user research. So I leave the last Mentimeter up here just for any feedback. I'll flick away from this, but if you have anything that you'd rather not say right now, or if anyone who's online doesn't want to chat later, please, any feedback would be really helpful. And this is all stuff that I will help me in the next steps of my project. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for having me today.